Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic radio show and podcast. We are going back to our series, Heritage Hunters, where we've been discussing the converso or, ancient Jewish heritage of Spanish Portuguese who landed in the Americas. And as we've discussed through my research and my presentations and different genealogical and historical conferences, it's a very complicated subject. And there's been new information that has been coming out. We're lucky to have a genealogist, John R. Campbell, who's going to be sharing his perspective and what he has been able to find. So this is the first time that we meet. So I would like to know more about you. As I've shared with you, I'm a returnee to Judaism, first generation, you would say, I guess, first generation living Jew versus just being someone who has a Jewish ancestry, and then raising a Jewish family and trying to develop documents and integrate myself into the greater Jewish community. So it's easy to do that in Texas and in America, where there's religious freedom. And if you find an open enough community, you can do that. But I know in Latin America, there's still a lot of stereotypes, a lot of discrimination and persecution of Jews, and a lot of almost shame from people that came from descendants of people that were persecuted by the Inquisition, or they were hiding, or that they gave up their Spanish Jewish heritage for safety and assimilating into the greater culture. But what happens when people do that? They're still discriminated, they're still dismissed as new Christians or suspects that they're still practicing a religion that is passé and that is no longer acceptable to the greater Catholic community. So how did you come across this, and what was your interest in learning more about the hidden Jews of Latin America?
It all started back when I was 12 years old. I'm presently 64 years old, but back when I was 12, back in 1970, my great aunt, Luisa Marulanda, sat me down and she presented me, out of all the nephews and nieces, she chose me to present the genealogy of the family and how we descend from Juan Ildefonso Ramon, who was a mayor of Laredo in the early 1800s. And mind you, this is 1970, and I have no way of researching any of this. And again, I'm 12 years old, and I sat on this information until 1993 when I bought my first computer. And the first thing I did was started doing research on Tomás Sanchez, the founder of Laredo, in 1755. And a book appeared in an online bookstore in San Antonio about Tomás Sanchez and all the founders of Laredo. And this author explained that Tomás Sanchez arrived in Laredo in 1755 with 11 families, and that they were all cousins. And what the author does in this book, he presents us with the genealogies of Tomás Sanchez and the other founding families. And I noticed they all descended from one couple, Diego Treviño and Beatriz Quintanilla, who arrived in Mexico City from Spain in the 1550s. And I refer to Diego and Beatriz as this region's Adam and Eve, and I don't use that term loosely. Anybody with deep roots in this region, which is northeastern Mexico and South Texas, descends from Diego Treviño and Beatriz Quintanilla. And this author, Guillermo Garmendia Leal, I noticed at that point that every single founding member of Laredo descended from this couple. So what I started doing on a computer, I purchased a family tree maker software. I keyed in my lines of descent from Ildefonso Ramon, which was given to me by my aunt. And then I started doing further research on Tomás Sanchez descending from Diego and Beatriz and linking up all the other families. And little by little, as one could say it's a puzzle. It's literally a puzzle. Just keying in who Tomas Sanchez's children were and all the other founding families, how they intermarried, and working my way down to the present from 1755, and in turn from the 1550s. So as I looked at the big picture, I noticed that the founders of Laredo descended from somebody who arrived in Mexico City in the 1550s. And I kept going back to this online bookstore and purchasing more books. I right now possess I built up my own genealogy library. And along the way, I noticed that one book, it's called by David Raphael. It'll come to me in a minute, but it outlines how the Jews ended up in Mexico as they were fleeing the Inquisition in Spain. And I'm going to preface all this by saying I'm not a historian, I'm a genealogist. My target was to just fit everybody into a family group and how they all descend from Diego and Beatriz. But along the course of this, I noticed that we descend from Jews. In the course of my research, I found one study by Dr. Thomas Hillercuss from the Universidad Autónoma de Zacatecas. And his entire study, and David, I'll email you this. There's two studies actually, which assisted me greatly in pointing out how we descend from Jews. Dr. Hillercuss targeted this one Jew in Spain in the 1300s, Abraham Halevi, and how the Oñates, the founder of New Mexico, and the Mendozas of Zacatecas, from whom Tomas Sanchez descends, how they all descended from this one Jew in Spain in the 1300s. So this is what introduced me to the Jewish line of practically every family in northeastern Mexico and South Texas.
Well, let me tell you my stories, and maybe you can fill in some of the gaps if you're familiar with my family's last name. So when I was a teenager, I ran into a family from Venezuela, and they were involved in evangelical movement that started connecting with the Jewish roots and all that. And they said that they had come across lists from the Inquisition that had Latino last names, and that at that point, and this is something that I've also tried to unravel, is the myths and the exaggerations that sometimes happen, where people would say anybody with a Latino last name or with a Z in their the last letter is of Jewish origin. That's kind of the stuff that I first heard. I hadn't heard anything growing up in Mexico, in Monterrey. I knew that my family was very secluded, that they didn't like to talk to strangers, they didn't like to intermarry with native population of Mexico, that they thought they were royalty. We were low middle class, just Mexicans, and we knew that there was something a little odd, but there was nothing like completely distinct about us and the rest of the population. And then the more I dug into the book, The Martyr, about the life of Carvajal and his family members,
yes,
I ran into Tomás Treviño de Sobremonte, which we have Treviños all over in our family. We have people with same last name that intermarried on my mom's side and on my dad's side. And then I met a rabbi.
Treviño? Their last name is Treviño?
Well, mine is not, but my mom's is. And then my grandma and my grandpa on my grandma on my dad's side, and my grandpa and grandma on the mom's side, something like that. I ran into this Jewish gentleman from New York, and I showed him some of my last names, and he said that the one that sounded more Jewish was Elizondo, because it has EL at the beginning. And my dad is Elizondo on his mom's side. And then I started hearing about Cantu, and now I know about the 5 names that Spain has recognized as Jewish, such as Villarreal, Guerra, and I always forget the other 3.
Those are all core names in my database. Those are
So,
all core names.
So I have 3 out of the 5 in my family.
Uh-huh.
But the issue always comes back to, well, okay, fine, there was Jews that fled Spain and they landed in Mexico, but they're all conversos. They're not actual like practicing Jews. So
Right.
how can someone claim to have Jewish heritage? Is it like the Russian Jews that a lot of them intermarried in the Soviet regime, and they know that there's some Jewish line somewhere, but they can't really point to it because they're all secular and nobody really cares? Is that how you would describe the people from northern Mexico, where since everybody's a nominal Catholic or whatever, that the only Jewish heritage would be kind of maybe through intermarriage and some type of vestiges of a Jewish past? Or is there like a ongoing, like some people would say, my uncle, my grandfather pulled me to the side and age 13 told me that we're Israelitas or that we're Hebreos. So it's more like an actual Jewish presence, but I didn't have that in my family. I know that if an egg had blood in it, my grandpa would throw it out. I know that when someone died, they would cover the mirrors, but that's about it. We never heard anything else. How would you describe it as like a converso descendants, actual crypto-Jewish community? How would you picture the people from northern Mexico and south side of the U.S. who come from that heritage as a whole? Do you see them as a real thing or something that is like barely fading away? Or
this is just me, and again, I'm not a historian. I don't claim to be. I'm a genealogist. But a lot, and I tell people this who ask me questions like this. I tell them point blank, you need to seek out a historian for something, for questions of this nature. From what I've gathered, I went to Madrid about 5 years ago. My brother and I went to Madrid, and I noticed practically everywhere we went, there was there was an animal leg on top of a stand everywhere we went. Restaurants, clothing stores, malls, whatever, there was always this one animal's leg. And as we're sitting in a restaurant, I asked the waiter, what exactly does that leg signify? I see it everywhere I go here. And he said, and this is the Inquisition in 1 minute, okay? He said, Fernando e Isabela eran los reyes católicos. Ella era la fuerte. Ella le dijo a Fernando, nos vamos a casar y vamos a unir nuestros reinos, y los que no se quieran convertir al catolicismo los vamos a matar. So this is why some ended up fleeing to Mexico, where they also had an Inquisition. And from there, from what I gather, the ones who ended up in Mexico, at some point over the course of generations, they were allowed to practice their religion behind closed doors. But at some point, they just started being baptized, married, and buried in the Catholic Church over the course of generations. So from what I gather, they just got tired of hiding and became Catholics, which is why we have all the records now available that I create my database from. So that's how I would sum up the Inquisition in 1 minute.
So for those that don't speak Spanish, what that waiter was telling you was King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella wanted to unite their kingdoms. They came together and they said, anybody that doesn't convert, we're gonna slaughter them. And that's why people fled. The 5, according to the new thing where they're trying to give people citizenship of Spain, it's to some people have had success, some others haven't. and I think it's closed now, but the 5 names that they recognize as Jewish are Guerra, Garza, Cantu, Villarreal, and Ortiz.
Okay.
And I have Garza, Cantu, and Villarreal in my family. So can someone say, well, 3 out of 5, or we have features or migration patterns or oral histories or traditions that show a crypto-Jewish background? Is that how Mexico is? They have a caste system. So if you're more Spaniard looking, you're in a different place than if you're more indigenous looking. But what people don't understand is that people in Spain are not all blonde, blue-eyed. They're tan, they're dark, they're all kinds of different people. And it could be from the Moors, it can be from the Jews, it can be from the Visigoths. There's a mixed bag, and they're short and tall and big and skinny. So this idea that there's a certain Jewish look, or that someone who comes from a Jewish ancestry would have certain features, you don't think that would be true for Spanish Portuguese Jews, because they're very varied and diverse, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow.
I was preparing a genealogical study for a client once, and she showed me a picture of her grandfather and her father and his mother. They were both in facing each other in profile. And this woman's grandmother looked exactly like Golda Meir, and she had her last name was Garcia. But it was just amazing how she resembled Golda Meir down to it. She could have been her twin. And this client told me, doesn't she look Jewish? And I said, she looks very Jewish. And her last name was Garcia.
So this is a picture of me with my maternal grandparents. I was blonde and blue-eyed when I was born. And my grandfather had very light skin to the point where he would turn red from the sun. And my grandma had olive skin and very curly hair. So again, it could be all kinds of things. It could be that there was a Visigoth guy that converted to Judaism in Spain back in the 1300s. And what I know from the 1,000 years of a Spanish heritage in Spain is that they were way more open to have not only convivencia, but a marketplace of ideas, a type of philosophical Judaism that was open to converts and to the sciences, compared to the more closed off Judaism of the Eastern Europeans or the Ashkenazim. So again, if people are not familiar with what was going on in Spain and the height of Jewish learning and growth over there, it's easy to make assumptions that they would all look like Israelis, or they would all look like Arabs or something. And that's always been the attack against the Jews, is they're foreigners. That no matter where they live, they're always weird and odd and not in line with the wishes of the people. But living in Spain for that many thousand, since the times of the prophets, there's been a Jewish presence in Spain. They were so well established, and they were 10% of the population during these pogroms where they started attacking them in the 1300s, that by the time that they were expelled, I'm sure that they looked like the local population. It's almost like the story of Moses, where they he was a Hebrew because he looked just like the Egyptians. So Esther and all the other Jews throughout the history who people didn't know their true identity, is because they look like the rest of the people. There was nothing weird other than their beliefs or their distinct clothes. There was a time in medieval Europe where Jews had to wear red hats or yellow hats, and that's where the yellow Star of David came from, to differentiate them from the rest of the population, because they look like any old German or any old Italian or a French person. So was it the same in your family and the people from your location? Was there any distinct features or traditions or rites that they did that made them distinct from the rest of the population?
Well, the thing is, and I thought about this recently, like eating el pan de semita, Semite bread. We never knew what pan de semita was, but we just loved it and we grew up eating that. The tortillas. But the thing is, nobody ever told us that we descended from Jews. I discovered this really on my own. The one thing we learned from all the tias growing up is que todos somos primos. We're all cousins. We're all related. Nobody could tell me how or why. In the course of my research, I discovered that all our ancestors happened to be intermarrying in order to keep land in the family. And the book I was referring to previously, it's called The Conquistadores and Crypto Jews of Monterrey by David T. Raphael. And he cites among the cities in Mexico, Monterrey has a mystique all its own, marked by the enduring, quote, Jewish question regarding its founding in 1596. The historian Vito Alessio Robles made the statement that, quote, all the citizens of Monterrey are descended from Jews, close quote. This is the historian Vito Alessio Robles saying this. This includes chapters on early prominent founders and families, Alberto del Canto, Luis de Carvajal, Gaspar Castro de Castaño de Sosa, Diego de Montemayor, the founder, and the Garzas of Lepe and Monterrey. So again, I learned all this years after my tia just told me we're all related. She never, at no point did anybody ever tell me we descend from Jews, at no point. When I started finding books and articles of this nature, that's when I just started realizing that, and then hearing about how the Jews fled Spain, fled the Inquisition in Spain. That's how we ended up here. And again, all this is in a nutshell. I'm sure it's a very complex history. And I'm in no way going to pretend to be an expert on this, because again, I just want to put everybody into the respective family group and create their descent from the ones I call Adam and Eve, Diego Treviño and Beatriz Quintanilla. So that's where I'm coming from. But the fact that we descend from Jews, it's a very fascinating subject.
But I feel lied to by the historians in Mexico, because growing up over there, I came when I was 15 to Texas, but growing up over there, I lived in South Mexico, in Cancun and in Monterrey. Okay. And they tell you about the Mesoamericans like they don't exist. Like there used to be Aztecs, there used to be Mayans, and now they're gone. And then they tell you that when the Spanish came, they just took over and that's it. Like you never see, other than people begging in the streets, or they do some type of a special ritual or whatever, or presentation, you don't see much of the indigenous population. And then any other group that is not Roman Catholic, sanctioned by the Vatican and by the Spanish conquistadors, doesn't exist either. You hear that maybe some French that fought during the Battle of Puebla is stuck around. Maybe there's some Germans who came and brought beer and they became Mennonites and sell cheese in the streets. And there is a couple of African people that became famous being actors or whatever, but you never hear of it, how diverse Mexico is to begin with. The movie Frida shows that there was people from Russia and Germany and other places that were fleeing and landed in Mexico in the 1930s. But the people who were founders, who came with all kinds of traditions and beliefs and ideas, I came to find through the Rabbi Pierre Tarlow used to have a conference at Texas A&M every couple of years. And one of the documents that he had on his website mentioned that Moroccan Jews used to heal one another with an egg. And it was and you would get rid of the evil eye with that. Throughout my life, I thought that was an indigenous practice. My family was like obsessed with that weird ritual, that if you felt sick, they would rub around an egg all over you. And if it comes out full egg, that means that someone did give you the evil eye. And if it splatters, then you're fine. Then to find out that it is actually like almost like a Kabbalistic thing that was brought from the Mediterranean, like blows you away that no one's done any exposition about that. There was a lady who did some research about people in San Antonio, and she found the image of a hand like this.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying that it was the hemsa from the Mediterranean also, and that they use it in Israeli folk culture. And is actually, she had it wrong. Like this is the holy hand or whatever that has the sign of Jesus and it has 5 saints. Like this is the hemsa. So there's some confusion even on from a lot of the Eastern European people who try to look into the Spanish Portuguese heritage in the Americas, because they're not that familiar with Mexico or Latin America. They're not familiar with the language. They're not familiar with the ongoing attack against Jews. I remember as a kid, all you hear is the Jews killed Jesus, and anybody who's not Catholic is going to hell. So how can anybody ever say, oh yeah, by the way, we're descendants of Jews, or we've been practicing secret rites in our basement? And like, it's almost like putting a target on your back. And there's a lot of cultural shaming from being part of hermanos separados, or what they would call heretics. So what has been your experience as people find out that they have this Jewish ancestry? Is it a shock? Is it a form of honor? Do they feel that things finally make sense? Or is it just another unsolved mystery of how difficult the descendants of the colonizers and the supremacist Spaniards and the mess they made when they came to the Americas?
When I give presentations and I give the background on everything I just spoke about, of course, towards the end, I touch on, do you all know we descend from Jews? And I see most people nodding their heads, but not in amazement or in shock or in grief or dismay. It's just like they all know it. They've all heard it, and that's it. Let's move on. So nobody really seems to ask the question, like the questions you're asking right now. Nobody seems to want to touch on that, on the vast historical nature of how did all this come to be. Like I said, I just noticed they all shake their heads and smile, like, yes, we know. And then I'll give them the very brief history of how the Jews ended up in Mexico and how they fled Spain. But other than that, nobody approaches me afterwards to delve more into why is it this way. Nobody's ever asked me anything further, but they all nod in agreement that they know that, like, they've all heard. They're vaguely aware that we descend from Jews, but now that we're Catholics and Christians. But the 300, 400, 500 year history of all that doesn't seem to come to the surface. Nobody asks. And like everything you just explained right now, this is the first time. This is the first I ever hear of all this, because again, I reiterate, I'm not a historian. This is the thing, I'm dealing with every family. Literally, I'm putting every family into one database and connecting us all. So I'm just busy dealing with the genealogical aspects of all this, not the historical aspects. And I tell people this, I give you the who, when, and where. The what, the why, and the how has to be answered by a historian, because I don't have the time to be, I really don't. My days are filled with just building up my database and linking everybody in to build up their study. But like you just said right now, everything you just said right now about the Portuguese, Jews, and all these other aspects, this is all new to me.
Does anybody try to use your research to try to get citizenship in Spain?
Yes.
Has it gone through?
I've had a couple of I've had a couple of people ask me for hire me to present them with their genealogies, and I do, but you know, I don't know what's happened beyond that, because I just present them with what I have, and then after that, I haven't heard anything else concerning. But I've had a couple of clients approach me about that Spain is handing out. They want dual citizenship, and they have to prove that they have Jewish roots from Spain. And I tell them I tell them what I just told you is I just give them the lines of descent from this one couple, and after that, you all can read into it whatever you want. But I do give them the Jewish lines from Abraham Halevi. For whatever that's worth, Dr. Hillercutt's work, his research is on that, and I give all the credit to Dr. Hillercutt, that he's the one who presented us with this, and this is how you descend from this Jew in Spain in the 1300s. So we do have Jewish links to Spain in the 1300s. But to what extent all my research does in getting them their citizenship, I don't know. But I haven't heard anything negative either, so I'm assuming they're getting the citizenship.
What's interesting is that what I heard, that the Spanish opportunity has been closed, but the Portuguese one is still available. And then there's been articles where people have paid $15,000 to have an attorney present the documentation, and then it didn't go through, or someone else. In the Spanish one, they had put these two kids who were like Jewish graduate school students, and they would only approve the ones that had Mediterranean last names, like people from Greece, place like that. But if you were from New Mexico or Latin America, they would blow you off as there's no way they're all related. So typical dismissal of Spanish Portuguese as exaggerating. There's been a lot of books where they say that the Inquisition created Jews, in the sense of every time they torture someone, someone would say, I'm a Jew, so they would leave them alone, and that's just ridiculous. The Inquisition were like the Nazis. They were very well versed in what they were doing. They were very methodical and kept really good records. So this idea that someone would pretend to be a Jew so to get people off, or that they would just accuse anybody of being Jewish, they had the means and the ability to find out if they were truly Jewish or not, or practicing Judaism, because a lot of the inquisitors were ex-Jews. They would send Jews who converted and became monks, or there was a guy who was a rabbi who became like a bishop or something, and they knew what to ask and how to push people to admit that they were practicing Judaism in secret. So it wasn't like they were foolish or assuming or making stuff up. They knew exactly how to hunt down people and hold them to the fire, no pun intended. So, and what people don't understand, they'll try to minimize the Inquisition and say that, oh, well, they only killed about 150 people in the Americas, when in Spain they killed 1,000 or more. But they went all the way to all the way to the Philippines to hunt people down. So in one of my presentations, I showed how Hitler's obsession with Jewish blood, tainting people's physical or spiritual descendancy, came from this Catholic obsession with purity, spiritual purity. And they said that even when Jews converted to Catholicism, they still smell like sulfur. So he got the idea of putting people in ghettos, of slowly killing them, or killing them on the spot, or persecuting them religiously or physically. All those ideas came from historical things that had already taken place during the Inquisition. So in Mexico,
all that triggered the final solution.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
And he was a devout Catholic. They try to say that he was an atheist, try to say that he was a naturalist, or into some type of Odin style mythology and stuff like that. He was a devout Catholic. He would have mass and have Catholic chaplains and all kinds of stuff during his stuff. So, but there's also the possibility that he had some Jewish ancestry and he was like self-hating. But when it all comes down to it, it's this idea that anything that stands against you, which is not typical, is problematic, and Jews started getting associated with enemies of the state. So if somebody stood up against him, you're a Jew. And that's how they treat you in Mexico. I don't know if you are familiar with the Spanish term Ladino.
I've heard it, Ladino.
So growing up, they would say that guy's a Ladino, and it would be a form of saying that guy's a scoundrel. So someone that has no morality, and then you come to find out that that's the language of the Spanish Portuguese of the Mediterranean. So it's funny that they would associate that word with people who are troublemakers. So, and then I have a friend from Guatemala where they called his family Ladinos all his life. And it was because it was connected to being a descendant of Jews. So it's outrageous how even in popular culture, to be called a Jew or to think of someone as a Jew is almost like a demoniac, someone who's not only a heretic, but an enemy of God. So Catholic medieval mentality is so ingrained in Latin American culture that I don't know how there's even any Jews thriving or existing in Latin America, because it's almost like being a pariah just by the self. If you define yourself as a Jew, you're pretty much setting yourself up to be not trusted by anyone around you. There's this professor that I know that says that oral histories have to be accepted. So when I tell people there's no physical proof that we're descendants of Jews because all the records have been burned. It's almost like when the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed during 70 AD, all the 12 tribes that people talk about, like there's no, we have no knowledge available of who's who and what's what, other than they enslaved the majority of the population and took them to Rome. And then whatever Jews were left, they created a council, a Sanhedrin, under the auspices of the emperor. And then they kept Judaism going. And a lot of it was in Iraq versus Palestine, because they were kicked out of that area. So in the same way, the Jews of Spain who came with fake names, with, they weren't allowed to come to the Americas, but through Carvajal and other people who kind of advocated for them to come as colonizers, they were able to make it. All we have is Catholic records, or whatever's left of people's last names and whatever name they brought with them. So how do you sort out who's who and what's what? Another person who I met at one of these conferences, she applied for citizenship and got it, but she was saying that based on her research and the little research that I was able to do online, that we were all descendants of El Cid, which is this Spanish mythical hero. Is that possible, that everybody's a descendant of, I saw that somehow I might be a descendant of one of the wives of Cortés. Is it possible to be almost like Forrest Gump in a sense, where you have all these famous people as your ancestors, the Sancho, the King of Portugal, if you're doing this genealogy, or is that the genealogy can get confused because of the records?
David, this is such a deep question, but the answer is yes. The answer is yes. Irrespective, if I didn't know that Charles Windsor was Charles III, and what I do in my line of work, in my course of study, in my research, I'm just looking for the links based on what these people are saying at the time. What I've gathered from, there's one study by George Rice-Camp. He's a professor of history at Brigham Young University. And he did his study, and I'll email you both these studies so you can review them. This professor and Dr. Hiller, because they've gone to Spain, they're citing sources from the AGN and the AGI, and the books of Nobiliario Genealógico de los Reyes y Títulos de España, of which I happen to have the originals from 1622, where King Felipe IV of Spain commissioned the author to write up the genealogies of all the nobles in his kingdom. The fact that we descend from them, it's not a stretch. It's not a stretch. These people their descendants were intermarrying with the commoners and the Indians, and look at Prince Harry right now marrying Meghan Markle. You know, she's half black, and the fact that these kings, that Charlemagne and El Cid and Fernando III El Santo would all have descendants in America is not a stretch. And this is what I tell people. This is what I tell people when I prepare their genealogy. I'm a disinterested party. I don't care where your genealogy falls. I'm just telling you what I've seen. So I'm not out there to link you to Fernando III, but I'm able to because of the work, because of the research and the work and the studies that Dr. Hiller Cuss and Professor Rice-Camp have provided us with, where they cite their sources. So I'm basing all my studies, all my information that I present to my clients as being a disinterested party and just presenting you with your genealogical study as I see it. So your question, you know, are El Cid's descendants running around in Laredo, Texas right now? The answer is yes. And it's not a stretch of the imagination. It's just people, it's just their children getting married and having more children. And they're not all just marrying royals and nobles. They're marrying commoners and mulattos, indios, marranos, and all these. They're just intermarrying with the indigenous peoples, and which, again, it's not a stretch of the imagination. You got to realize they're just humans. El Cid just happened to be a human that, you know, he was a conquistador of Spain, or a big, you know, historical figure. Charlemagne is the same thing. He united all the kingdoms of France. But at the end of the day, he was just a man who had kids. And that's how I sum all this up. And when I'm doing my research and looking at all these links, I'm just telling myself, oh, then this is all based on the research that I'm seeing. And I'm looking for verifiable research. I'm not just throwing out, because I know a lot of people are dying to be descended from, you know, Charlemagne. I know that, but I'm not here to give you that if I don't see it. And I tell them flat out, I'm not your friend here. I'm your genealogist, and I'm going to present you with your genealogy the way I see it, based on what they were saying at the time. Well, so if I find a document out there that links you to Charlemagne, David, and chances are I could link you to him. Well, I mean, that's what I've encountered.
I know that it's not your specialty to talk about DNA and things like that, but you know, when I hear that there are people from the Mormon community involved in genealogy, I find it suspect because they have their own agenda.
Right.
To prove that they're the descendants of the Jews who came before the destruction of the temple, and that somehow Jesus came and talked to them, and they were the native community, and blah blah blah. The same thing would be with the bad, I would call it bad reports or negative experiences that I've heard from people with DNA, where they'll take 3 DNA tests and they all say different things. There was a point, according to one person, that they used to separate Sephardic heritage as one type of group, and now they've renamed it Mediterranean. And I almost feel like they were feeling that too many Latinos were claiming to be Sephardic, so then they had to muddle the waters, so then people won't get so cocky about being Jewish. And then not to speak ill of other Jews, but the Ashkenazi community is kind of closed off in that sense too, and they like to focus on how they are descendants of Aaron and descendants of royalty from the Jewish line, and that maybe if a lot of Latinos are showing signs of having Jewish heritage, it somehow threatens them. Have you heard anything like that where it's inconclusive? Because all I hear from the people that almost seem like they have some type of they own some stock in the genealogical companies or something. They talk about DNA as the new wave, and you can't prove religious involvement through DNA. So how can
Right.
someone say, I know my ancestors are this or that? The problem with Judaism is that ethno-religious civilization. So you have both the genetic component, but you also have the willful conversion or religious devotion of the individuals, and then the cultural components related to it. So have you heard people say, they found 12% Ashkenazi, so I'm Jewish, or I'm half Sephardic, half native Mexican? Like, how can people make those claims, and is it really shown in these DNA kits and results?
I'm gonna back up a little on the Mormons. And on that note, I understand a lot of people want their genealogies to look a certain way. I've encountered it. I've encountered people asking me to do something else, and it's like, no, this is my answer. When somebody asks me to do something that I'm not seeing with my own eyes, it's the answer is no. Because at the end of the day, as a genealogist, all I have at the end of the day is my integrity, my reputation, and my dignity. So what I'm doing with Mormons records, for whatever they're, and I know what the Mormons are doing with all this, but at the end of the day, they're giving me the copies of the actual baptism, marriage, and death records from the books of the parish. That's all I'm relying my information on, my research on. Are you Jewish? Are you Catholic? Are you a Muslim? Are you a Christian? Are you a Martian from Pluto? That doesn't matter to me. I just present people with their lines of descent from Diego Treviño and Beatriz Quintanilla and other links that I've made to Spanish nobility and royalty based on the information, on the verifiable research that I've seen. So again, this is why, and again, I reiterate, I'm a disinterested party in all this. I don't care how your genealogy looks. Now, after I present it to you, you can read into it, and you can call it, and you can label it whatever you want. That's not my concern. My concern as a genealogist is to present you with your lines of descent as far back as I can go, verifiably. And if it's not if it's hearsay information, I tell you this is hearsay information, because I have these marks that I put on verified information and non-verified information. Because again, as a genealogist, I tell myself I'd rather have this information here than not have it, because I can't verify everything. Records get lost, they get stolen, they deteriorate with age, they get burned in fires. So some records are just not available. But if your parents' wedding record got destroyed in a fire, and you told me your father is so and so and your mother is so and so, I'm going to rely on that, and I'll make a notation that that's hearsay information, but this is what David told me on this date. So again, you're asking me, what do people read into all this? They can read whatever they can read into it whatever they wish, because again, I'm not a historian, but I understand that people have the want and the need to belong to a certain group, because I've heard it and I've seen it.
So when you hear that Ocasio-Cortez or some other congresswoman says, I know I'm Sephardic because I'm from Puerto Rico, is that just like a wild claim, or is that most likely, or should they be more careful, like that Elizabeth Warren, where she was going around saying she was native, but the native community has their own rules.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So that's what I tell people, that the same thing goes with being Jewish. Like I've been challenged, like, you're only Jewish if you think you're Jewish and if the Jewish community considers you Jewish. But every community is different. So you might get a bunch of people who want nothing to do with you because you're Mexican, and then you meet someone who's like, okay, sounds good. So it's easy to give up and say, well, no one's ever going to accept me. My sister-in-law did her DNA test, and it came out that they had a lot of Middle Eastern blood.
Mhm.
And I said, well, Middle Eastern people are very particular, just like Jews and other groups. If you start attending their events and learning about them and accepting their culture, they might take you in, but it's not going to be immediate. And they're not just going to say, okay, come on over, because they've been through a lot. Just like the Native community. There was a young lady that was mad because they were making a big deal about how much Indian blood she had in her, and she felt that they were being racist. But because they've been persecuted and mistreated for so long, they have to be particular about who can be truly considered one of their descendants. Have you heard of, there's a group, they had a radio show, and they were indigenous Texans who had pretended to be Catholic and just Mexicans for many years. And now that there's more freedom, they're actually trying to establish themselves as a tribe and get recognition. I almost feel that it's the same thing for descendants of Jews of northern Mexico, where we're like a mythical people that we're finally coming out of the shadows, and it's taking a lot for us to be accepted. Have you come across any other group like that that is that now that there's more evidence and there's more research that we can make a stronger case?
The answer is no, I have not. From my experience, and as people approach me, what they want most, basically, at the very least, they just want their lines of descent as far back as I can go. It's in the issue of Jewish or Catholic, or like no religion comes up, no religious connections are expressed. They just want to know who they are and where they come from. And I touch on the Jewish question at the end, because again, my focus is to just make all these connections, to tie us all into one big family, because we literally are one big family in northeastern Mexico and South Texas. And I don't say this flippantly. Anybody with deep roots in this region descends from Diego Treviño and Beatriz Quintanilla, whose grandson married a granddaughter of Diego de Montemayor, the founder of Monterrey. So if you descend from Diego and Beatriz, you descend from Don Diego de Montemayor, the founder of Monterrey, September 20th, 1596. This is just normal for anybody in this region. And these are the people that I touch on. Taking somebody back to the year 1596, Don Diego arrived here in 1548 from Spain. I possess the books from the Archivo General de Indias, which were commissioned by the Duke of Alba, and it clearly shows Don Diego de Montemayor arriving here in 1548. So this is as far back as I can verifiably connect anybody. And then the Jewish question always comes up towards the end, because my first concern, my first focus is to link these people into my data, I call it the core. The core being Diego and Beatriz and Don Diego de Montemayor. They're the foundation of my core, and my first focus is to link everybody into this tree. And I touch on the Jewish issue afterwards, but nobody's really interested in the Jewish connection. But I ask them, and they say they're aware of it, and it ends there. They don't delve any deeper.
Well, all I know is that there's so much to unravel, and the oral, like what I tell people is oral histories are important, migration patterns are important, genealogical research documents are important, but also being validated for feeling out of place, or feeling like an oppressed people. All those experiences create a Jewish identity in someone. It's not just one thing or another.
Mhm.
It's easy to run into the Jewish community where they say, well, where are your documents? You need to have a ketubah, a marriage contract from your parents or grandparents to prove your lineage. And like I was saying, there is no pedigree that is available if you were under persecution. And then there's also anti-Hispanic bias and a lot of almost racist, pandering, where like they feel that we might want to be accepted or feel that we have a more, because Jews are a protected group in American culture. It's not the same in Mexico, but here Jewish people have a good reputation. So it would, for some people, it's like, oh yeah, I have 12% Ashkenazi or whatever. That's great, but what are you doing with it, and how is that a part of your life? So there's always been this battle between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, because in Eastern Europe, there's all these stories of Jews giving their lives to protect Judaism in the pogroms, and then there's this idea that the Spanish Portuguese Jews just gave in, that instead of killing themselves or dying for the cause, that they all were willing to compromise their faith to be accepted. And there was a little bit of everything. There's stories of people doing that in France and Germany before the assimilation of the 1800s and 1900s. So it's a very complicated history of inner Jewish conflict, as
Mhm.
well as what's
Complex, very
going over
complex.
here with cultural and first generation immigrants and things like that. I appreciate you bringing up people from the border, because there's also a difficulty being from neither here nor there, with the border being a place of contention, especially for Texans, which a lot of them, their land was stolen and things like that, and they were considered white, and then they put them in a different category. And my mom came to San Antonio from Mexico when she was a child, and there was a sign at the gas station that said, "No blacks, no Mexicans, no dogs." And since she saw that, she wanted nothing to do with the U.S.
Mhm.
And I hear all kinds of stories of Jews trying to flee the wars in Germany and Poland, and not being allowed into the U.S., and then landing in Mexico and having actually more access and freedom over there, and some of them even smuggling themselves into the U.S.
Mhm.
afterward. So it's a crazy world that we live in, but I think that idea of people connecting with their heritage, where they truly came from, is a new thing that is happening, because people feel so disconnected, and American culture has kind of lost its way.
Mhm.
So people are clinging to something like, where am I from? How is this important? How can I pass this on to the next generation? And hopefully through our research here on our show and the work that you do, we can give people that ability to feel part of a greater whole. Would you like to share with the audience, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, or if you have any resources available online that they can tap into?
Uh, I don't have anything online. What I do encourage people to do is to contact me at my email is my initials, John Ross Campbell. It's JRC78040 at yahoo.com. I encourage people to come by my house, my office, to see my library. I have a fully stocked genealogical research library here at my house. I have access to the Mormons website, which provides me more access to all their records, baptism, marriages, and deaths. I encourage people to come by because they need to see everything I have and what I do, and to explain to them exactly how I do it. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation explaining every aspect of Hispanic genealogy and genealogy in general, because we really are all connected. And I don't say this flippantly. We're all one big family, and my goal is to tie everybody I can into this my database, which currently contains 301,000 individuals, all connected to me by blood or marriage. And this is what I encourage people to do. David, if you're in Laredo, you need to come by and see this. The chances, I'm going to tell you right now, just the names you mentioned, Trevino, Elizondo, the chances are very great that I already have your genealogical history done for you. I promise you. I promise you. Elizondo, Trevino, Garza, Villarreal, those are the core names of this region that I specialize in. So when I hear people talk like I was hearing you talk right now, you're mentioning all the core names that I have on my database. So if you're Elizondo and Cantu, Trevino, Garza, Villarreal, Ortiz, those are all my core names that I specialize in. So if you're ever in Laredo, you drop on by and I will present you with your genealogical study.
Well, I'm seeing an article online from the Laredo Morning Times, which discusses your library. And
yes.
So if anybody wants to look into that, I'll put it on the comments or on the description of our YouTube video, and also on our broadcasting website, podcasting. So I just want to thank you for enlightening us. We've had multiple people discuss this in the broad way and historically, but to have someone who specializes in this is a blessing, and to give people hope, because in my experience, there's a place in New Mexico that they'll give you a certificate of Sephardic heritage that you can use with Embassy of Spain or Portugal. You have to pay $500 for that, plus another $1,500 or up to $5,000 and someone doing genealogical tree. And I asked them, what about people who don't have any money? And they said, oh, well, you're on your own. So I also feel that sometimes it's like, people that have, extra income can do these type of projects. But if you have this available, and I don't know how accessible is it, but we need to, it's almost, the more we know about our past, the better we can make decisions for the future, and the more connected we feel with one another. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you giving people the tools to be able to do that.
I will tell you this much, David. I have been known to give away a study or two. So I'm not in this for the money, okay? God has blessed me with a good job, a good income. I want people to have their genealogical histories. I've actually given away more than I've charged for, so it's not beyond me to do that. So I want people to have this.
Wonderful. And I feel like anybody,
it blesses me. It blesses me.
Well, anybody who's informed or can advocate for themselves, even in the world in general, who has confidence in who they are and what they're all about, can achieve more than someone who's not able to, who's at the mercy of others. Yeah, and I've heard from a very wise Latina activist that if we don't celebrate our culture, nobody else will. So we come from a very disjointed and mysterious group of people, but a lot of it has to do with how these countries came about. So it's time for us to rise and be proud of our heritage and bring positive values and positive things to ongoing culture. So again,
and love one another. Love one another.
Especially, and here we talk a lot about anti-Semitism. We talk about Jewish ideas and history and stuff like that. But when it's all said and done, is to bring people to a closer understanding of our purpose in the world and find meaning. So I thank you for what you do, and I hope that we can stay in touch, and maybe you can come on the show later and tell us of other things. And there's some weird stories that I've heard throughout the years, so maybe we can do Mythbusters through history and genealogy next time, where we can see if there's
I would love that.
Of some of these things. But thank you so much, Mr. Campbell. And
okay.
Again, we'll stay in touch, and it's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.